Good evening and welcome to this workshop of the Board of Education, Anne Arundel County. Tonight, the board will receive in-depth information about the recently released Maryland Report Card results. The Maryland Report Card provides schools across the state with star ratings calculated from a variety of academic attendance and curriculum factors. While this workshop is open to the public, no public questions or comments will be taken. This workshop is being broadcast live on AACPS TV, which can be found on Channel 96 on Comcast and Astound, and Channel 36 on Verizon. High definition broadcast can be seen on Channel 996 on Comcast, Channel 496 on Astound, and Channel 2136 on Verizon. The workshop can also be viewed live on AACPS's YouTube channel. So thank you for joining us, everyone. Dr. Bedell.
Thank you, Mr. Silkworth, and also members of the board. It's great to have the full board here at a workshop. This is pretty refreshing. So thank you all for coming. I want to start off by just, first of all, extending kudos to this phenomenal team over here. One of the things, one of the first people I spoke to upon arriving was Jason Dykstra, and I told him that I'm a monster when it comes to data. Like and it was something that was music to his ears, and I think what we have done in the 2.5 years of doing this work, this team has been very creative. I think a lot of the things that I did in a previous district, they're now done on steroids because of the kind of talent we have within this department. I think this board and this community is in for a treat today, or just around where we are as it pertains to the state of Maryland accountability system, but also where we want to go and how we plan to leverage data to ensure that we're going to continue to make the most informed decisions. It is also important to note that this progress that we've had over the last several years is not sustainable when we don't have support from this community overall. I know this school board has done a phenomenal job of supporting us with the things that we know we need to do budgetarily. But in order to continue this and to also be able to make sure that we have phenomenal staff here, it just requires a greater outreach to those who are elected and to the community as a whole, that in order to get to this level of greatness that we're trying to get to, it does cost. It's just the reality of it. And so we have to make that commitment. Otherwise, these reports that you're seeing now, they're just not going to be sustainable. And I just need people to understand that as we get ready to go into this budget season. So with that being said, I'll pass this over to Jason Dykstra, who will also take us through and introduce the staff and get right into this presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Bedell. And you were not lying. You do love your data. President Silkworth, Vice President Dent, members of the board, and Dr. Bedell, good evening, and thank you for having us here tonight. For the record, I am Jason Dykstra, Chief Accountability Officer. I will ask my esteemed colleagues to introduce themselves as well.
Anna Harding, Senior Manager of Accountability.
Michelle Hall, Senior Manager of Accountability.
Melissa Souter, also a Senior Manager of Accountability.
So our Senior Managers of Accountability actually divide their time between the networks. So each one of them supports one of our networks and the 3 assistant superintendents that go with them. We are really excited to have the opportunity to share the state report card data for the district. If I'm telling the truth, we really love this stuff. So we're going to try to get you to love it with us tonight. So we're going to get into it. So before we get into our presentation tonight, we want to remind you about some common abbreviations with state accountability and testing. We have also provided you all a copy of these terms and definitions. Those of you watching, you may want to take a screenshot. We'll just give everybody here a couple seconds just to refresh themselves. Most of them are pretty common. Probably obvious, But our regulations and policies and current strategic plans certainly support accountability, meeting state requirements, and most importantly, eliminating achievement gaps, which is the primary goal of ESSA. We will show specifically how all of this is aligned to our work. Let's begin with a little history and background. No, there's not going to be a quiz, but we will kind of take a look at where ESSA kind of came from and what the impact is on the state accountability system. So the truth is, accountability systems have been around for a very long time. They've been around my entire 34-year career. So they're not new. They've had different names over time, but they're not new. Many of us were familiar with NCLB, No Child Left Behind. It was around a very, very, very long time. We may remember things like AYP, Adequate Yearly Progress, or SPI, School Performance Index. Those were all part of the federally mandated, at the time, accountability systems. The one unique thing about any accountability system that we've had over time is that they were always based on testing. All of them. Every single one of them was always solely based on testing. And so really what's new with ESSA is ESSA actually introduced more metrics, more factors to look at when kind of giving a school a report card for accountability. Just a reminder, ESSA stands for the Every Student Succeeds Act. And that's the biggest difference. And we're going to show you all of those metrics tonight. So we're going to show you every piece of data that goes into a school report card that shows up. This is actually only our 5th state report card because of the pandemic. It is also the first state report card that can be compared to the prior year because all the metrics were included and there were no calculation changes for the first time. So you can see on this chart how things have progressed. So when the first couple report cards came out, we didn't even have all of the metrics yet. Some of the tests were new, etc. Then we went into COVID. We came out of COVID. They changed because of the impact, the significant impact of the pandemic. They changed some of the calculations. And then last year, we got a report card that had all of the metrics and calculations, but we're dealing with some waiver issues, right? And now finally, we have the 5th report card. And that report card is literally based on the same data, same calculations, and it really is for the very first time what we'll call apples to apples. So in order to better understand ESSA and the state accountability system, AACPS uses the analogy of a house. I will now turn it over to the team to take you on a tour of the house. You may want to buckle up a little bit.
You can think of us like your real estate agents, but I have great news. You've already bought the house, and so you're really just getting a tour of it for the first time, as it is law. So as Mr. Deichter said, this is the metaphor that we have used throughout the implementation of communicating ESSA to stakeholders. The idea here is that it is a cute little image or graphic. However, it's really more than just a visualization. It helps you understand the metrics for all stakeholders. It's a consumable concept, and it really frames the metrics. And what I mean by that is, for example, on the first floor where it's purple, school quality, if we get students to come to school, if we get them to feel like they're valued members of the community and we get them in the right courses, that's going to lead to that second level where we see progress over time, right? And then once they are making that adequate progress, we're going to see that proficiency or success on the MCAP assessments in the upper levels of the house. So excited to go through this with you today. I'm afraid you're going to think I sound like a broken record here, but the truth is I get excited about the fact that ESSA, our strategic plan, school improvement plans, and blueprint all have this alignment component that is a continuous thread. You've seen a variation of this slide potentially in other presentations, but this one's a little different now because what you have on the right-hand side is a representation of each of the rooms of the house, and you'll notice every single room in the ESSA house shows up as aligned to one of the strategic plan indicators, which is meaningful because it helps our school-based leaders and our central office friends to know where the priorities are and where their focus should be throughout. As a reminder, when we go through each of the rooms of the house, there may be a little visual number there, and that number is to help you reference back that is aligned to one of the strategic plan priorities. So why are there 2 houses all of a sudden on your screen? On the left-hand side, you'll see a representation of the elementary and middle school house. And on the right-hand side, you'll see the high school house. For the most part, those levels are identical in terms of the color coding, but on the second floor in the green level, you'll notice there's some variation where elementary and middle have this larger room for growth, whereas in the high school house, you have graduation rate and ninth grade on track, which is very appropriate because that is the only level in which that applies. The other rooms in the house are at a minimum all named similarly, but they may have nuances in terms of their calculations, and we're going to go through each of them specifically. For the majority of the rooms, they must have a minimum of 10 students in order to report out on them. And so if a school does not have 10 students, the room is not considered in the calculations of the overall house. I'm going to go ahead and pass the foundation of the house to Michelle Hall.
Great. So we'll start with the school quality floor of the house, or if you will, lay the foundation with students for their academic success. The first measure on the foundation of the house is chronic absenteeism, which is 15% for each level, elementary, middle, and high, all calculated the same way. Points are awarded based on the number of students who were not chronically absent. For a student to be counted positively for this room, they need to be in attendance more than 90% of the days they were enrolled. It's important to note that this is different than the daily or average attendance rate, which is the percent of students in a building in attendance every day. Note the reference to the strategic plan indicator here. As Ms. Harding said, this relates to strategic plan indicator number 4. The second measure is the Maryland School Survey, which surveys students in grades 5 through 11 and educators in school buildings. This is worth 10% of a school's overall score, 7 points for the student survey and 3 points for the educator component. It measures student and educator perceptions of safety, environment, community, and relationships in the school building. And the final measure in our foundation of our house is access to a well-rounded curriculum. It is worth 10 points and is calculated a little bit differently for each level as indicated on this slide. We like to think of this room as, is it on their schedule? Do they have access to it? For the elementary school, a student will receive points for the a school will receive points for the percentage of 5th grade students enrolled in science, social studies, fine arts, PE, and health. For the middle school level, a school will receive points for the percentage of 8th grade students that were enrolled in a fine arts, PE, health, and computational learning course at some point during middle school. Computational learning is another word for computer science. And at the high school level, a school will receive points for the percent of graduating seniors that at some point were enrolled in an AP or IB course, were dually enrolled, such as something through AACC, or a CTE course at the concentrator level. If the student is certificate bound, participation in a general education or elective course counts for this room. The coursework monitored in this room at the high school level helps AACPS to prepare students with market value assets. I'm going to pass it back to Ms. Harding.
I'm back. In the green, in the second level of the house, affectionately referred to as school progress, you'll notice some differences between the elementary and middle school house as well as the high school house. We're going to begin with the high school house. The on-track 9th grade room is worth 5 points, and it's calculated by taking the percentage of 9th graders enrolled in the full academic year who've earned at least 4 credits in any of the 5 areas: math, English, science, social studies, or world language. The second room for the high school house is graduation rate. You'll notice that aligns to priority 2 in the strategic plan. It's 15 points total, where 10 of those points are allotted to the 4-year graduation rate, and 5 of those points are for the 5-year graduation rate. This is one of the metrics that is lagging data. This is reflecting students who entered in the 1920 school year. So this is really the class of 23, their 4-year and their 5-year rate. Perfect. For elementary and middle school, we have growth. Growth is 25 total points, where half of that is for English language arts and the other half is for math. This is only applicable to students in grades 4 through 8, and they must have 2 consecutive years of scores in Maryland and be enrolled in the full academic year. Each student receives a student growth percentile score, which is just the percent of Maryland students that an individual did better than with the same original score 2 years previously. The school's growth is the median of all the individual SGPs, student growth percentiles, and then that median number is applied to an assigned score table. This is one of the more complicated rooms. I see your faces up there. Trust me, it's a very, very cool metric because it really compares apples to apples, your peers in the entire state compared to one another, and really seeing, are you shifting the needle? The next room is credit for well-rounded curriculum. That applies to elementary, middle, and high school. 10 points for elementary and middle, 5 points for high school. We'll start with elementary school, where again, Michelle Hall talked about her room, which also has well-rounded curriculum in it. That was about accessing it. Is it on their schedule? This is, are they being successful on their report card, essentially? So one is about schedules, one's about grades. 5 of those points in elementary schools is the percentage of students that are passing social studies, fine arts, PE, and health. And the other 5% of those, or 5 points, is the percent of students scoring proficient. Those are going to be your 5th grade students on the MISA MCAP assessment in 23-24. For middle school, also 10 points. They're allotted slightly differently. We have the percentage of 8th grade students that are passing math, ELA, English language arts, social studies, and science. 3.5 of those points are the percentage of 8th grade students scoring proficient on MISA, and the other 3.5 are the percentage of 8th grade students scoring proficient on MSSA, the social studies MCAP assessment. Both of those align to the strategic plan priority 1. And last but not least, for high school, this is kind of connected to the producing students with those market value assets. So it's the percent of graduating seniors in 23-24 that achieved any of the bullets below. A successful proficient score on the assessments listed in the first bullet. Credit for dual enrollment. Those are students that are in the AACC courses. UMD entry requirements, which the majority of our students qualify for by taking 2 years of a language and going through Algebra 2 and mathematics. The CTE apprenticeship certification or MSDE approved program, as well as seal of biliteracy. MSDE aspires to include the last bullet in the future, although for this year's report card, it is not included for students that are designated to be certificated completers.
To be a part of the English language proficiency room, a student must have 2 access for ELL test scores in the last 3 years, and one of which was in the 23-24 administration. There are 3 ways to earn points in this room. First, a student can earn a 4.5 composite score and be exited from the program. The other way students can earn points are by showing progress on sliding scales based on their initial score, their growth from the previous administration to the current one, and how many years they have been in the EL program. So now we have built the foundation, added the levels to the house, and we are ready to put the roof on it with the MCAP performance. To be part of the MCAP performance room, a student had to be enrolled for the full academic year, September 30th through April 15th, 2024. In elementary and middle schools, this room is worth 20 points. Math and English language arts are worth 10 points each. Both contents are then divided into 2 measures, percent proficient and the performance index. Percent proficient is the percentage of students who earned a 3 or a 4 on the MCAP assessment. Performance index is determined by taking all of the 1s, 2s, 3s, and 4s and averaging them together. These measures are calculated the same way for both math and English language arts. In high school, the room is worth 30 points, 15 points for math, and 15 points for English language arts. The premise of the calculations is the same, but there are some differences from middle school and elementary school. The assessment scores are from exiting seniors and are extremely lagging. For English language arts, the assessment was taken in their 10th grade year in the spring of 2022. The math MCAT for students who took Algebra 1 in high school was taken in the early fall of 2021. For high school math, proficiency can also be achieved by earning a 520 on the math section of the SAT. If a student took Algebra 1 in 8th grade, then the SAT is the assessment used for this measure. However, because the SAT doesn't score using 1s, 2s, 3s, and 4s as MCAP does, SAT scores cannot be used to calculate the performance index. So it is calculated using fewer students than the percent proficient measure. In some cases, the average was determined using half as many students as in the proficiency room. In previous years, due to the pandemic waivers, the performance index did not count for some high schools because of their not having 10 students, the minimum for this metric. Going forward, this metric will count for most high schools as they will have more than 10 student minimum. As we mentioned earlier, the house in Anne Arundel County is a metaphor, but MSDE uses the concept of the report card. The data for all applicable state schools is available online in the newish web address on the screen. Schools are given a rank out of 5. They are also given a percentile rank when compared to other state schools in the same grade band, such as a high school compared to other Maryland high schools. The total number of points earned out of points possible is calculated for each school as a percentage. Keep in mind that the total number of points possible will vary among schools. Not every school is calculated out of 100 points if they do not have enough students to count in a specific area. For example, some schools do not have 10 multilingual learners who took the Access for EL, and therefore progress toward English language proficiency is not included in the numerator or the denominator for those schools. Using the calculated percentage, the stars are assigned as you see on the screen. Please note that MSDE does not round up the total percentage. For example, if a school earned 59.8%, it would earn 3 stars, not 4. I'm going to pass this back to Michelle Hall.
So that was a lot of information. Let's take a look now at how AACPS did for the 23-24 school year. I'll give you a minute to review the chart that is on your screen right now, where you can see the breakdown by level and stars. So the good news is 92% of our schools are scoring 3 stars or higher, which is above the state of Maryland, which is at 83%. And looking more closely at the data, there are 21 schools that are within 3 percentage points of the next star level. If we compare star ratings from the 22-23 school year, 21 schools increased their overall star rating, and 8 schools decreased their star rating. Overall, in AACPS, 80 schools increased the percent of points earned from 22-23 to 23-24, and 36 schools decreased the percentage of points earned. Of special note would be Hilltop Elementary School, that increased by over 20 percentage points, resulting in a 2-star increase. Looking at how AACPS did by indicator, this chart displays the indicator, points possible, points earned, and percent for each floor of the house, color-coded to match our cute little metaphor. I'll give you a minute to review that information. So in addition, the percentages now highlighted in yellow show increases from last year. While there are still many opportunities for growth, the majority of our metrics are headed in the right direction.
So we've given you a lot of information. We've shared a lot of data. And what is our current status? How do we compare? How do we look when we look at other districts and take a look at those rooms and those levels of the house? So here's a graphic, a lot of numbers on this. We're going to start on the left for you. When we just take a look at our elementary schools statewide, we have some great news. Our elementary schools have moved up 4 spots in ranking. So last year, you'll notice that we were ranked 13th in the state based on our report card. And this year we rank 9th. And so what you'll also notice in that far right corner is Dr. Bedell talks a lot about, we want to be a great school system. We want to be in the top 5 in this state. And the great news is we're not far off of that. We're right there knocking on the door. And all things being equal, we're about 1.4% from being where we want to be. Now, they may improve too, and we need to make up about 1.4% to put us kind of where we want to be. Again, Michelle just highlighted on the previous screen that we had lots of improvements in various rooms in the house. And so you can see on the screen that in those categories, those rooms of the house, or those floors, I should say, of the house, we improved the number of points on this report card versus the prior report card. We had a little good news also in middle school. We didn't improve 4, that'd have been awesome, but we did go from 8th to 7th, again, looking at that left-hand side of that chart. And so we're now 7th in the state for middle school performance. Equally good news is that we're about the same 1.5% away from being kind of where we want to be. We didn't have quite as much growth, or in fact, this one we have straight across the board. We did better across the board for middle schools. So we have more points in all aspects of the floors of the house with our middle schools, which is certainly great news. And we're really excited about that. So again, if we can continue this trend, as Dr. Bedell alluded to at the very beginning, and we can keep this very consistent improvement across the board in various rooms of the house, we can get where we want to be. So last, our high schools are up 1 spot. We started 14th last year. We're now up to 13th. You can also see that we are the furthest away from being in the top 5 with respect to our high school performance. We're a little under 6% away from being in the top 5. If we take a look at the rooms of the house where we grew, you'll notice that there's a couple less circles there as well. And I just need to remind this group and our audience tonight that, as you heard in our presentation, high schools is where we see all of the lagging data. So the majority of this data is very lagging. And so what we know from our most recent data is that this is going to continue to get better. We know that. We know that today. So when the state does the report cards for high schools, as we communicated tonight, they look at a graduating class and then they look back. So some of the data on the report card, as we kind of highlighted for you going through the house, some of that data is 3 to 4 years old. And so, and even including graduation rate being almost 2 years old. And so we just have to remember that when looking at this, and we are optimistic, to be very honest, because we know that some of our more recent data is going to put us further up that chart. So we're excited about that. But again, lagging data certainly impacts that. There's a lot to be proud of. There's a lot to celebrate. There's a lot of really good news in our data. I think you all saw it, but we have improved our MCAT performances in just about every area in ELA and math. We're very excited about that. As you just saw, our district rankings are moving in the right direction. The vast majority of our schools are 3, 4, and 5-star schools. Well over half of our schools are 4 and 5-star schools. We highlighted for you that 21 of our schools improved their star rating. Certainly very proud of Hilltop, our only school to go up by 2 stars. And then again, as we've highlighted, I believe in the press release, lots of those schools are our community schools, and they improved their star rating, and 17 of those schools actually improved their report card score. So we're seeing improvement across the board. And that's what we want to see in the district. With any data point, with any report card, I think we all agree there's always room for improvement. There's things that we can be focused on. There's things that we can, challenges that we can continue to address. We've addressed that first bullet pretty well. But some of this data, particularly at the high school level, is fairly lagging. It is what it is. That's how the state does the report card. If you don't know, we do not get item analysis or any type of item analysis data reports from MCAP. We get something called an evidence statement, which is kind of a broad standards-based thing, but we don't actually get item by item analysis, which would be helpful. And as you saw on the chart, and this is true statewide, there's not a ton of secondary schools in Maryland, and we don't have any in Anne Arundel that are 5-star schools, and we don't like that. We want some of our middle schools and high schools to be 5-star schools, and we're going to work with them very closely to make that happen. But that's a trend across the state. And so it's hard to be a secondary school with all of those metrics and come out as a 5-star, and we're going to work on that. Just a reminder to the group, Dr. Wright and the State Board of Education has put together a kind of a task force, a work group to really take a look at testing in Maryland. They're actively doing their work now. They're also looking at implications for the accountability system. Don't know what that's going to produce. We'll keep you certainly up to date on that. But there is work really looking at, is the state report card what we want, and is state testing where we want it. And so I think that conversation will continue to take place here for probably the next year or so, and we'll kind of keep you all up to date. You probably saw some opportunities for improvement on some of those slides, particularly at the secondary level with our English language proficiency. We're not getting a ton of points at the middle school or high school level there. There's certainly room for some growth there. What we saw statewide with MCAP, MISA, the Maryland Integrated Science Assessment, the scores there were double-digit drops across the entire state, us included. And so we know that there is work to do there, where there are some points to be gained if we could get some more students doing better on the MCAP science test. And middle school math performance, we know that there's room for growth there as well on MCAP. Chronic absenteeism is kind of good news and more room for improvement. So the good news is that we are 3.6% better than where we were last year. That's the direction we want to go. We know we monitor our attendance. Actually, we monitor it every week, but we put out reports to schools every month. And so there's a lot of monitoring that goes into that. And so we're very excited to say that we're up again this year. The reason it's an opportunity for improvement, pretty straightforward. We're still not back to pre-pandemic attendance levels. So that's the reason it's still an opportunity for improvement. We want to get back to where we were, and then we want to even get better than that with respect to having as many students attend 90% or more in school. We know that if we have them, we have a much better shot at making sure that they're growing and that they're achieving success.
Give that back.
It's all yours.
While we are thrilled to be in front of you in December and not later, which has been the case in previous years, it's important for you to understand that the pieces of the house are being assembled and collected throughout the academic year. So if you'll look up there, the report card that we just received in December of 2024 had data pieces that went back to February of the prior year, when our English learners take their access assessment. We're preparing for that assessment here in just a couple months for this year's report card. Obviously, throughout the year, we're monitoring attendance and grades. I do want to be transparent, though, that because of some of the lagging data, it is difficult during budget cycles to plan accordingly. And things like scheduling students when the data is lagging make it difficult to make those shifts throughout to make the improvements that you aspire for. However, we are working with the cards that we're dealt with, and we will keep moving forward accordingly. So we don't really get the full picture until the SS State report card comes out, which has historically been in this December-January timeline. So anytime I do a professional learning session, I typically go, so what, right? That was a fun little information session, but if it's only information, while that may be helpful, it doesn't really shift the needle. And so I bring this slide to you today because this has implications for our work moving forward. You heard me talk in the beginning about this notion of alignment to school improvement planning. When schools are developing their goals, every single one of their goals is tied to a room in the ESSA house, which again is tied to the strategic plan scorecard, right? You're noticing a theme with me. But this is why the work matters, because our leaders need to know what they need to focus on in order to shift the needle and have the data show up in terms of the ruler. The strategic plan scorecard, obviously you've heard of that over the last month. We will continue to monitor that and update that to reflect the state report card site, with the ultimate goal of reducing our 1- and 2-star schools and increasing the 3, 4, and ideally 5-star schools within the district. You saw Mr. Dykstra refer to how close we are on some of the levels to being top 5. We're coming for you, right? We are coming for those districts that are in the top 5. We will be in there shortly, and we will keep making these small incremental changes in order to make that happen. So without any further ado, we are open to your questions now and look forward to answering them.
Well, thank you. That was a lot. Okay, so we're going to go in roll call order this evening, and I will let folks know it's Hafsa Hamdawi, Gloria Dent, Joanna Tobin, Sarah McDermott, Dawn Pulliam, Dana Schauheim, Erica McFarland, and then me. We'll start out with Hafsa.
Thank you all so much for a wonderfully informative presentation. As always, I actually have to admit it was so thoughtful that I don't really have anything for you at the moment. I am sure that as other people ask questions, things will come to my mind. But for now, I think I will let Ms. Dent go ahead.
Okay, Miss Dent.
Not quite so lucky with me. So let me say, first of all, thank you all for this information. So I'm pretty sure that Dr. Bedell will remember this. It's like immediately last year, as soon as we finished this, I was like, Dr. Bedell, I need an office call. I need something. We need to talk. And we met. And I was so just really needed to understand, like a deep dive. He spent almost 2 hours with me trying to help me understand why many of the schools in District 1 was not improving. Like, I don't really care if you just do one, like I'm not into the data like you are, Mr. Dykstra, or anything, but what I do like is for progress to continue. And so I remember very vividly when Dr. Bedell first took place, he said, and he still repeats this, is that I don't want students that are improving to come down. I want to keep pushing them up. But I do want for the schools or students that are performing at a lower level, I want to push them up too. And so I told them last year, I'm going to hold you to that because my schools haven't pushed up since I've been on this board. And so I can say unequivocally, I owe you lunch. Okay.
I will take you up on that too, because I like to eat.
Because I really was just worried that somehow or another, even though I didn't understand what Maryland system did to like what is, and so this becomes the question. So first of all, to Ms. Berry from Hilltop, congratulations, kudos to you and all of the staff that worked hard to move the needle 20%. That's a lot. That's a tremendous amount. And so that's probably where we need to get is go into Hilltop to figure out what's the secret, right? But I do still have that burning question is that by and large, for schools that are underperforming, and I think of underperforming those schools that don't make a lot of progress, not necessarily those schools that aren't at 5, right? What do we do for those schools, and how do we resource them in order for us to make sure the accountability system is working? How do we do that?
Let me take this one. So there's a couple of things. What I would tell you is, one, it does take time, especially with schools that have historically struggled. You have to put the right structures in place. You have to put the right people in those schools. Generally, when you think about the schools and the areas that you represent, we've historically had staffing issues. I think a lot of that has been rectified, right? It's one of the areas that tend to get hit harder when transportation issues arise within the school district. I think we've addressed a lot of that. But then it's the high quality access to curriculum. Putting Reveal and putting CKLA in, it is going to be the greatest equalizer, in my opinion, especially for schools where kids show up with social and emotional distress because of the foundational aspect of what they're getting. As you talk about moving more into your secondary and in your secondary schools, this is where the conversation around how do we redesign what that middle school experience will look like, because it will undo everything that we're doing at the elementary level if we continue to operate middle schools in the manner in which we're operating them. So there's going to be some work where we put together a task force to begin to really talk about what this redesign will look like for middle schools. But then the last piece for me is, because these schools are actually now starting to receive a lot more resources, whether it's community schools or the Title I funding. And we, in my opinion, are extremely data oriented in a way. I mean, I'm just telling you this. They will tell you these deep data dives don't just start here. We're doing deep data dives with senior teams on when we have those meetings. And so it is beginning to permeate through the system. And so our decisions now are being made on how we're going to make budgetary decisions in a much more calculated manner. And that's how you're going to continue to see us excel. And to your point, no, we don't want variance. We don't want schools up and down. We can probably explain to you the 8 schools that dropped. And some of those drops, some of those schools were already super high, and just a little bit of a shift has caused them to drop, but they're still schools that are, in most cases, pretty high performing. The 2 ones that got added, those are alternative schools. They're going to always be ones. I don't even know why that's a part of the accountability system, but that's another conversation. And so our focus will continuously be to make sure that there's accountability around using the resources properly, so that that level playing field really does play out in the results.
Great job. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Dunn.
Okay, Dr. Tobin.
Thank you. Thank you, as always, for a wonderful presentation. Always good to see you guys. So I have a couple of things I wanted to ask about. So Dr. Bedell, you were just talking about the business of, and again, congratulations to Hilltop going up. But I believe last year, Annapolis Elementary went up 2 stars and they dropped a star this year. And you have often said that we want to be cautious about changes like this that can. So I wonder if you have any thoughts on, because obviously we wouldn't want the same thing to happen with Hilltop. Are there additional supports or analysis that will be helpful in understanding how to maintain that when those big jumps happen?
Yes. Now, we talked about it. I'll let you kind of answer that question.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Thanks, Dr. Tobin. So one of the things that we do here, so we gave you guys the quick and dirty tour of the house and all of the rooms. And then we actually work with school. I don't do any of it. These 3 amazing people to my right, they support schools directly. So we actually give them, Dr. Tobin, not just, they get their house personalized to their school. And then within that, they get a series of files and data reports that are very, very specific, down to the student, down to the teacher, down to the data point, so that every school knows very definitively where things went well and where things maybe we missed the mark, and then helping them with that progress monitoring, right? So we can't just show up with a state report card, right? And say, oh, we're surprised by the data, right? There is a series, they're in schools pretty much 4 to 5 days a week. And so there's progress monitoring that happens based on their school improvement plan that we refer to. And so, one, are you working on what you should be working on, where there's, some room for either improvement or there's some points to be gained? And then if we hit it, great. But to your point, if we don't, what does that analysis look like? And then we have a series of reports and dashboards that are available to them so that they can really understand, where's the issue? Is it instruction, right? Is it support, to your, what you mentioned? Where did it miss? Was it circumstances?
Mhm.
Did we just have a whole bunch of kids come in and out, and it was due to circumstance? Was it the we Melissa had mentioned that they don't round up, don't round down, that kind of thing.
Right.
Was it really one of those where I was right on the line, right, and 10 students who we knew didn't have great attendance, and none of the interventions worked, and that cost us a point where we were less than a point over. We do what we're talking about right here, hypothetically, we do that with each and every school. And as you can imagine, we prioritize the schools that dropped.
Right.
We prioritize the schools that we really want to move up, because the goal is pretty simple. We don't want any 1 or 2-star schools.
Right.
So we prioritize our time to make sure that they have the information and data available. And then we work very closely with our academics team and Ms. Catalano's team to make sure that we're pushing in with those supports. The other thing that we're doing this year is, as you all know, and largely due to the alignment to Blueprint, we're staffing our schools differently. We're funding our schools differently. We got money following the students. Again, all in the hope that those resources that we know certain student needs and certain student groups need is available to those schools. So it's very personalized. It would be my short answer to your question. And it's done shoulder to shoulder. And a lot of it falls on the three amazing people to my right. And a lot of it is partnering with our academics team to make sure that we're really focused on what's going to move the needle. The data point that there was a lot of great data in this presentation, of course. The one I really like the most is the fact that, well over 2/3 of our schools are moving in the right direction. I don't want to see any schools moving down. I want them to lose a point if we can help avoid it. But what we do know is that what we're doing is working, because the vast, vast, vast majority of our schools are moving in the right direction. But we do need to work with those schools that either slipped a little bit, or those 8 schools that lost a star.
So what we'll do, because I think honestly, what board members probably would like to know, especially for schools that may have dropped in their area, like why. And so then what supports and resources are needed to continue to support them so they don't drop, so we can, hopefully, as you said, stop the bleeding. But I think it's more of just giving some context so we can work on making sure that for those schools who drop, you want some answers, we can give you answers. It's not a hard thing at
And
all.
again, I don't say this to cast any kind of aspersions on the work at Annapolis Elementary, because they've done incredible work, and they have moved. So it's simply a matter of, to your point, making sure understanding and sustainable progress. You talk about the importance of resources, the importance of the Blueprint funding, the importance of community schools. I just have to say, for my district, it's really phenomenal to see, for example, Tyler Heights as a 4-star school, Germantown Elementary as a 4-star school, Hillsmere as a 5-star school, but they are now on a par or ahead of West Annapolis, which has traditionally been one of the lowest farms population, lowest English language learner or multi-language learner population in my district. And I think certainly for myself, when I wake up in the morning and I think about what my real job is here, it is to do everything in my power to ensure that every student in this county, no matter where they live, has a fabulous school. So, I think that is a demonstration. Some of the movement in just looking at my own district is demonstrating that those resources are making a huge difference. So I just want to give a shout out to that. I have another sort of side question about tracking specific changes in curriculum and their impact. So Dr. Bedell, you mentioned Reveal and CKLA. Ideally, we're going to see not only the changes at the elementary level, but long-term changes at middle and high school level as we implement those. And on a smaller scale, and this is my baby, I'm interested in seeing the data following the students who are in the dual language immersion, because if the research holds, there are a whole lot of things that should come out of that experience that should demonstrate the value of that for results across the board, not just bilingual language. So I hope as time goes on, we can really sort of track some of those particular curricular changes and really look at in as granular way as possible the impact on the years going forward. So
Okay, I think it's both, it's curricular and programmatic
right,
changes.
right.
And generally, when you introduce a new program like a dual language program, you want a minimum of 3 years
Mhm.
in order to have some reliable and valid data. So we know we're in year 2 now.
Right.
So it'll be much easier to track. And the good news is because we started, I think with the kindergartners or
Yeah.
first graders, those kids will still be there. And generally you start getting your MCAP data at the end of that 3rd grade year.
Right.
So by the time those kids hit 4th grade, we should be able to see
What's happening,
some
yeah.
comparative data.
Great, thank you. I may have a couple more questions, but I'll hand it over to my colleagues. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Okay, Ms. McDermott.
Thank you so much. You guys are amazing. This is so much data and it's presented so beautifully. Thank you so much. I just had a quick point of clarification for my own edification here about chronic absenteeism.
Mhm.
I know our target is above 90%. Like
True.
that would be beautiful. You mentioned pre-pandemic rates. Was above 90% the actual rate pre-pandemic?
The 90% is the target. So the chronic absenteeism data point is in reference to what percent of students have 90% or above attendance rates.
Right.
So that's always the target. So prior to the pandemic, we had a higher percentage of students that were attending school 90% or more of the time on average. So we want to increase the number of students who have 90% or greater attendance rates.
Got it.
Is kind of what we want to do. And we're not quite there yet. We're close, but we're not there yet.
Okay.
Our average attendance is actually about back where it needs to be, 93, 94, 95%,
Okay.
which is great. That's the average for all of us, right? What we're looking at is how many students have a 90+% attendance rate and what percent of kids don't based on their days enrolled.
Got it.
Yeah, so that's what we want to get back to. We're close. Like I said, last year we were up 3.6%, which is really, as Dr. Bedell says frequently, that's a lot for an attendance rate. That's a
Awesome.
lot. You don't see that very often, so that's really good. And knock on wood, early indications this year. We started out really, really hot. Can't get too excited after you hit a couple of 3-pointers in the beginning of the game because then we cooled off a little bit in the early second marking period. But we're still ahead of where we want to be. So we're hoping for some more improvement this year. It may not be 3.6, but we're hoping for a little bit more improvement this year. And that would get us very close to where we were pre-pandemic.
And I think it's important that you all know that I'll take 0.1 as long as we're not regressing.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay, but to your point, 3.6 is it's a lot. And it is hard. And even when you think about our average daily attendance rates, I think as a school district, we've increased that over the last couple of years. But here's the reality. In my experience in education, you're lucky if you can increase your ADA by 0.2, 0.3 percentage points. That is kind of considered pretty significant. I think we, after the pandemic, have been increasing by almost 1% or so the last 2 years. So ultimately, that's going to be hard to sustain. I'm just telling y'all. So the goal is to kind of get us back, stabilize, and then you'll start. I think things will settle, and you'll start to see more of the, 0.2, 0.3, which is actually a really good thing.
Awesome. Thank you.
Ms. Pullum.
Okay, sorry, forgive me. Thank you so much. The last couple hours have been a fire hose of information. Thoughtful, on time, and perfect for me. I too am a data person. I do want to thank you because for me, it's always a program. What is your strategy? What are your objectives and your outcomes? And the data, it's all coming back. So it's easy to follow. And so the one point I want to make that you touched on, but I want to touch on it one more time. There are the areas that we need to grow, but based on our conversations here and the ones previously, I can see where we are really trying to move that, not trying, we are going to move that needle in terms of the investment and the community in Title I schools and all the great things that we're doing there. So I want to thank you for that. I think my main concern is now, how do we, for those that are about to graduate, how do we fill that gap in the timely manner? And will we need, and as Ms. Dent said, will we need additional resources to get them where they need to be, because they are about to exit and go into the workforce or into a trade or to college. Just how getting back to that. But in terms of presentation and all that you're doing, thank you so very much.
Let me just, I don't know if you want an answer or a response to that, or was that just a comment?
It was more of a comment.
Okay,
Because they're not there to solve the problem. They're providing the data.
Yeah.
But it's just something on my mind of now I see what we're doing, and it really does start at the K level or pre-K level. And I see that.
right.
So it's
Spot
not a
on.
matter of not doing it. But now we have this little situation where we have the high schoolers, and what do they need? What are the resources they need? And what do we need to do to support that?
You're spot on. And I think this is where the conversation that we're having around the market value asset graduate, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about that tomorrow when we have our one-on-one. I've shared that with some of the other new board members around this push to really be intentional around those academic plans and making sure that when these kids leave us, they are ready to thrive in any of the different formats that are available out there. We don't want to have a situation where kids are being boxed in that is college or boom or bust, right? Because I think that's always been a mindset. Either you go to college or you don't. So for me, we want to make sure we're developing well-rounded students. This same question that you brought up was brought up to me in Kansas City. And I remember, saying to the community and board members there, because we had done a whole bunch of stuff at the elementary level in terms of trying to redesign what the experience would be like, that it's our job to make sure that we're continuously being intentional with how we provide the supports to our kids in middle and high school. I was at West Annapolis last week for the training around the equity training and the CKLA. And one of the things I heard in that classroom was the teachers were talking about how the kindergartners who are being exposed, how much foundationally sound, more foundation sound they're going to be. But they also talked about fifth graders who didn't get some of the basics of this new curriculum, and that there is productive struggle. Like they're picking it up, but it's going to be a lot more seamless for those kids. So this is where we also have to continue with the interventions. I talked to Christina today about tutoring. We have a really good tutoring partner that we're partnering with. And we want to make sure that we're utilizing those services to continue to help us.
Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Schellheim.
Yes, hello, good evening. As always, it's amazing the work that you do and the way you present it. It's really, really super grateful. Of course, I submitted some stuff in advance, so I want to get it all on the record, so to speak, so that we're all playing with the same deck. And this is for the benefit of the public who might not be educated at all about these things. So I'll just get into it. So I'd like to confirm on record that every year's report card it follows a specific cohort of students and looks back to all of their milestones, at least in high school. That's what I'm talking about specifically, including when and where they took Algebra 1.
Do you want to do that?
It's Melissa's
Melissa,
room.
that's fine. We can highlight that again for you.
We'll
Ms.
jump
Schellheim.
on.
It's Melissa's room.
Yeah.
Is that what you said?
That's right.
Like
it. That's her room to
That's right.
redecorate.
Okay, great.
If
Great.
you ask my mother, I never kept my room clean, so it's a problem. But
Yeah.
So for high school, it is the students who were exiting in a certain year, right? So it may not be the exact cohort. So for example, if I went to one high school for part of my year and then another high school for another 2 years, the high school I am graduating from is who is attributed to my graduate profile, if you will, even if I didn't take my assessments in that school. So some of the measures are at any point in your high school career, for example, AP, IB, that kind of thing. But some of them are also each year. For example, chronic attendance, chronic absenteeism, or surveys. So it really depends on the measure. But it is based on the graduating class of a certain year.
Yeah, so I was going to say it's purely cohort based.
Yes.
And because you may have some kids that take Algebra 1 in the 8th grade, if I'm not mistaken, and then you'll have some kids who will take Algebra 1 in the 9th grade. So the Algebra 1 piece does not, calculate into that. I think the question you were asking is it's more around a cohort of students, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, yeah, I wanted to get into that a little bit further. So I'm going to talk specifics now. So I know that at Severna Park High School, for example, or I guess Severna Park Middle School, about 55% of that cohort takes Algebra 1 in the 8th grade. So that data would then be attributed to the middle school, correct?
Well,
No, that,
And if you'll allow me
correct.
to bring it up to the county level.
Yes.
67% of 8th graders are taking credit bearing, or let me try this again. In the growth room, 67% of the 8th graders are attributed in that room because algebra is not considered in terms of growth. It's only the grade level math 6, math 7, math 8 that can account for growth. So if you do the reverse of that, right, 100 minus 67%, that's the percent district-wide that are taking algebra, which means that that is only counting in the middle school house there, which means when we get to the high school room, like Ms. Souter referenced, their only option in our county is to do the SAT to be considered in towards the percent proficient. And that doesn't count towards the average score in the top room of the house.
So that's 33% that we kind of unfortunately don't get credit for.
In the high school level.
In the
at the
high school level.
Yeah.
We do get credit for it
Yeah.
in the middle school level,
Yeah.
is my understanding. Is that correct?
And
Yes.
then the SAT is used for those students in the high school level. So they are included in the percent proficient. It's just the assessment that's used differs depending on where they took Algebra 1.
Yeah, so going back to my specific, so then 45% of those kids in Severna Park cluster take the 45% of the group that takes their Algebra 1 in 9th grade, those are the folks that that's the data that counts towards the high school because they're taking it in the 9th grade as opposed to 8th grade, which goes to the middle school's data. Correct?
So again, there are 2 rooms for math, right?
Yeah.
And so if I took Algebra 1 in 8th grade, my Algebra 1 score goes back to my middle school.
Mhm.
So in high school,
It
that
would be the
percent
SAT.
proficient,
Yeah.
it would be SAT. So I am counted, it's just a different assessment. Now that average room, right? That is just 1s, 2s, 3s, and 4s. And since I don't have a 1, 2, 3, and 4 because I took the SAT as my assessment, then I am just left out of that room. But I am absolutely part of the percent proficient for high school math, no matter where I took my algebra.
Okay. I just think it's important for folks to understand that piece of it. Continuing on, wait, let's see here. Okay. So for example, so the Algebra 1 data we know is well lagged because no seniors taking Algebra 1. Gosh, we hope not, right? So, but we do have data from last year's MCAP. Of course we do. It's just not reported on our report card. And
Correct.
so when people look at, say, Severna Park High School, you see a trend here, a theme. And the fact that they dropped 1.1%, I might add, below the 5-star rating. that algebra 1, that doesn't mean that we're suddenly falling off a cliff in terms of our algebra 1 instruction. That just means that this data is lagged back to COVID times, and that we know that the schools already have last year's MCAP data. Is that correct?
Correct.
And so
That's
we
correct.
can already, although we can't report it on a report card, we can certainly shout about the fact that we know that there's been significant growth since those days, correct?
True statement.
Yeah, okay, cool. So I just wanted, for everyone listening at home, I also know the percentage increase, but I won't go there. I talked to folks too. All right, so, and this is, I'm trying to do all this as a celebration of what we've been able to accomplish, by the way. That's all that this is. All right, we already went over that. So lastly, let's see here. Oh, yes. So when I looked back and I did compare last year's report card to this one, and again, I looked at Smyrna Park High School. Although I could have looked at Broadneck, I could have looked at Arundel, I could have looked at any of them. I did see some changes, though, between those two report cards. There were two specific things, and I would love to get an understanding about why there were changes. So you're saying apples to apples. I believe you. You're better at math than I am. However, I do think it's important for the public to understand some of the differences. So in the academic achievement category, right? Last year, the total, the denominator was 22.5 points. This year, the denominator is 30. That changes the goalposts a little bit, and could have been the difference for the drop and from our 5-star high school, Savannah Park High School, to now a 4-star school, I think for the first time since the inception of this thing. So if you can explain like why that changed. And then I have one more after that.
No problem.
Anna is loving this. Go
I
ahead.
know, we're so
Go
excited.
for it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I do
know,
care
we're geeks.
deeply, and I looked
It's sad.
all the way through it. Yes.
So there wasn't actually a change in the calculation. It was that 5 high schools last year did not have the 10 student minimum for that room to count. So just as if they didn't have 10 English learners, et cetera, if you don't have the minimum, that room doesn't count in your numerator or your denominator. So there were 5 high schools last year that did not have that room at all included in their points possible or their points earned. But it still was calculated the same way for the schools that did have enough students in that metric. Does that make sense?
Yes, although I'm trying to think what part of academic achievement would they not have 10 students?
The performance index where we're averaging it together. Yeah, so if you don't have 10 students that had an MCAP score, right? So the 1s, 2s, 3s, and 4s, we couldn't average that together. And to be honest, last year, the high schools that did have that room, it was based on very, very few students, between 10 and 41.
Oh, snap.
So
Because of COVID.
because
Michelle,
of COVID.
there's two questions that are really connected here, which is if you look back at the cohort, your first question, right? When you look back at the cohort of students that count in that room, to your point, you hit the pandemic. Those students were waived.
Okay.
So those students, which is the vast majority of them, are waived. But we have mobility rates, and we have students who don't always make it to the next grade level. So those students, significantly tiny, right, move on to the next year. And the 75-page manual that tells me who to put in the file and who not to put in the file, right, says, nope, you've got to, yeah, I understand they were in 9th grade last year, but you've got to count them. They're in that cohort, right? Even though they kind of switched cohorts, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Right? So that's why these numbers are so small. Some schools didn't even have 10 students in that little, so it's two things together. It's lagging data, and it's COVID waivers that resulted in a small n. The great news is it was calculated the same for every school in the state. So we're not treated any differently than anybody else with the, how it's done. And it's a non-issue moving forward. We don't have that issue anymore moving forward. We're not going to have these small n's or schools with less than 10 anymore because we're out of waiver land at this point. So we're so yes. But the good news is the calculations were done, as Melissa said, consistently. They were done the same for all schools. the same number of kids were taken out of the numerator and the denominator. So it really is apples to apples.
Okay, well, that's good. Again, you all have better math than I do. And then to that end, there was an addition of average performance level of mathematics in the 24 report card that wasn't there in the 23 report cards. For the record, can you?
So
Help a
that's
girl out.
that same
Same
5
thing.
schools
Mhm.
that didn't have 10 kids to have that room. So it was there last year, but there are 5 schools it didn't count for because they didn't have enough students in the room.
Okay,
Mhm.
great.
Does that make
Great.
sense?
It does.
Okay.
All right. So thank you.
Mhm.
Again, that was all meant to
Provide
educate
Sure.
all of us.
clarification.
Yes.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you for all that you do. Appreciate it.
We appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Shaheim. Ms. McFarland.
Thank you so much for all your good work. The data that you're providing is really going to help us identify what we need to do to move forward, to move all of our schools up to the 4 or 5-star schools. So thank you for that. I was wondering if you can speak to, I noticed in the elementary, our data for the progress in achieving English proficiency is okay, but in the middle school and high school level, it is not. And I was wondering is that just a smaller pool of students? Can you speak to sort of what is accounting for that?
Sorry. I have all the fun rooms, I have to say.
We give Melissa all the hard questions.
So supporting English learners is also a passion of mine, so I'm happy to talk about it at any time. But essentially, on our secondary level, we have more students who have been in the program for 6 or more years. And so if you have been in the program more than 6 years, those alternate ways of earning points, right, those 2 sliding scale charts I talked about, no longer exist. So the only way a school can earn points for English learners who have been in the program more than 6 years is to have them exit.
Okay.
And so if a student enters in early on in their elementary years, they're very likely to test out eventually. And we are really excited about that. They're just little sponges, with learning language in general. But as they get older, right, they're taking all these academic classes that are difficult, right? And then they have that academic language concern. So on your secondary level, if you look at a student group that is referred to as long-term English learners, it is a much higher proportion of students on middle and high school level. And so it is difficult for them to test out at that point because they have been in the English learner program for so long. There are some other considerations. For example, a significant number of our long-term English learners are also identified as having a disability, right? And so if I have an IEP, this is going to add on to my language processing skills for some students. Also, it is really difficult to get English learner development teachers. They are scarce, and some of our secondary schools share a person, so they're not there full time, things like that. So the more that we can encourage these fantastic professionals to come to our county and work with our kids, I know our scores would go up. Obviously, English learners are impacted by all of their teachers. I don't want to make it seem like it is just the English learner development classes that they are in that impact them. They're impacted and they learn from all of their teachers. But if you have a school, for example, I'm thinking of one of the middle schools I work with who has not had a teacher in 2 years. And so members of the central office are going out and working in the schools trying to plug that hole, so to speak. But we really need to have more consistent support in terms of education for them.
Thank you.
You're
I
welcome.
appreciate it.
Ms. McFarland, to add to what Ms. Sauter said as well, the other group that we have conversations around is, at the secondary level, we have students that are called newcomers, right? They come through our International Welcome Center. They may be overage, they may be undercredited, they may have had interrupted education. And so we need to recognize that that's a growing population. in Anne Arundel County Public Schools. And a lot of times those students come to us at the secondary level. So they kind of come to us with an additional set of needs and supports that's very different than when we get a much younger learner who is not overaged, and may have had some more consistent schooling prior to arriving to us. But we are having conversations, and we're seeing an increase through our International Welcome Center with that population as well.
Good. Thank you very much.
Mhm.
So I guess it's my turn. I have some comments, maybe, and a few questions or two. Some things that struck me. Dr. Bedell is absolutely right when at the beginning he talked about that we have a lot of stakeholders and we can't do this alone. And so let's talk about attendance rate. I mean, years ago, AYP, North County, we made AYP most of the time. And our goal was 94%. Wasn't 90%. It was 94. So my thought is, if we can do that, why are we at 90%? So my expectations are that we need to set the bar higher, because when we do that, our kids always rise to that level. Maybe a question, graduation rates. Student shows up in grade 9 at Old Mill High School and then leaves after the sophomore year. Does that student count against our graduation rate?
So great question, Mr. Silkworth.
It goes to another county, not
Yeah.
another school in our county.
Yeah, so that's all based on codes. There's in this lovely 75-page technical manual, there are codes that count for schools and there are codes that count against schools. So here's the short answer to your question. As long as we know where the student goes, that student does not count against the previous school. The issue becomes when the student doesn't appear again in the system. So so we need that. As long as that student ends up in another educational setting, then that student does not count against the original school.
In the state or out of state?
Either one. There's codes for both.
Can I ask you a question? Do
Sure.
they still call those lever codes, or is there a new terminology?
Exit codes.
Exit codes.
It's called exit codes, just for the new board members to know. Okay.
Yeah, there's a whole series of state-approved codes that all local school systems are required to use, and they're all reported. Mm-hmm.
Right. So Hilltop, they are the stars, aren't they? Of course, I believe all of our students and all of our schools are stars. But you may not have the answer to this, but could you shed some light on why you think Hilltop? Now, I know Hilltop very well, very huge farms population. Those students feed into Lindale and North County. And I've always known that they could do great things. I've always known that because the students I had at North County did some really great things. So, but I was just curious, do you have any insight? And by the way, where I'm going with this is, if we know what that insight is, let's share it and share these best practices with others.
Yeah, so Mrs. Silkworth, certainly weren't going to get into school level specifics tonight, but you saw keyboards starting to smoke. You saw pens starting to write. They're pulling up all kinds of data that I shared with you. We give a lot of additional data and reports and insights into schools. So they just pulled up a couple of things. But to your point, just a reminder, when you have an accountability system that, what I say at the beginning, like, spreads the wealth, right? We have all these rooms, all these different ways of earning points. Sometimes it can be a little hard because, as you might imagine, maybe some went up, some went down. You're asking, is there, something obvious? And we can kind of take a look at, but we do that with schools, right? Hey, what specific parts of the room did you go up? We do it by student group, right? We don't just do it on the aggregate. We do it by student group. So, hey, what student groups improved? What student groups didn't improve? So, you just take this chart that's here and then multiply that by a dozen student groups, right? You can have a lot of moving parts. And So I would argue that's a good part of the accountability system is we're not just using test scores, as I said in the beginning, which is really easy to kind of look at. Hey, did you get better or not? Right. So we can do what you said. I think they pulled up some stuff, and there's no doubt that they probably have an answer.
To Jason's point, though, I would also add that like part of the beauty of ESSA is you often can't just move one room and jump 2 stars, right? Like you have to be doing things in multiple levels. Surely some of the rooms are weighted with more points than others, which you've heard tonight. But I'll let Melissa speak since that's the school that she supports.
So I am in love with the whole North County cluster. I worked there, and I love the schools there. And I would say some of the scores were impacted by a partnership last year with the North County elementary schools with who was OSP at the time is now DISP, right? And also their curriculum partners, really, really focusing on what can we do to help these schools? What can we do to focus on these schools? And they had an extended focus on their reading instruction. Their Title I team, their math and literacy support professionals in that building are on fire. They work so hard. They will email me at like 2 a.m, even though it's not healthy barriers, right? So they are really on fire. So what they grew a lot in was the student growth percentile, which is that complicated field that Anna was explaining to you before. But both in math and literacy, that particular room grew quite a bit. Also, whenever you're percent proficient, right, the number of kids who passed a test, it automatically impacts all those other rooms that are tied to it, right? So the averages are going to increase, the growth room is going to increase because the more kids you have passing, it has that kind of domino effect. Also, their attendance went up greatly. So I don't want to get too specific about them because this is like countywide, but the year before they struggled with attendance and they really struggled with reliable transportation. And so in schools that are impacted by poverty more, it is harder just to get the kids there. So the year before, the kind of bus routes that were a little unstable really hit Hilltop harder than some of the other schools. So having the consistent transportation among some of the other attendance works that the administration did really grew that particular room. So they worked really hard, and some of the barriers that were in place before kind of fell away. One thing, to go back to Ms. Dent's comment, that how do we keep it up? That kind of thing. They, being a North County school, they get a lot of new teachers, right? And so it is not uncommon for a new teacher to get their foot in the door and then transfer somewhere that might be closer to their house or whatever. And so the turnover of staff in some of our North County schools is higher than some of our other schools. So I think really working on building a culture, a climate of belonging, to go back to the strategic plan, will really help keep those really qualified professionals in the building long term so that they can learn the nuances of their curriculum and really support the students.
And I'll say this, I mean, I did an unannounced visit there last year. And one of the things that I walked away with was, to your point, the curricular focus that I saw when I visited, but also the relationships around chronic absenteeism. And the entity that I saw that they were working with, that was the first time I got to meet these folks who are connecting students from home directly to the school. Like, I saw them there with their caseload of students and was asking questions. And I would probably think that as we take a look at Annapolis Elementary at a later time, with the big jump that they had was because of attendance. I'm wondering if there was some variance there that shifted, because when I went into that school, I was shocked that it was a 2-star rated school when I went in there, and I figured it was attendance. So it's something that we know we got to continue to work on, attendance. That's why we're doing the initiative now, where we're really trying to promote people, attending school and having improved attendance, because we know that if we can get them in our schools, the rest can be taken care of.
And if I could just hop onto that again. one of the things they did at Hilltop in terms of like, what are some secrets that we can share? Their guidance counselor or school counselor went to every single classroom and did a lesson on how sick is too sick to come into school. Because when we went through COVID, right, after we came back, we're like, if you have the sniffles, if you have a crease in your eyebrows, don't come to school. And so it was kind of a, if you're, I'm not going to go into the specifics, but like, there are reasons why you wouldn't go to school. And then and anything else, please come. Wear a mask if you feel like it, but just come to school. And then raising the awareness with the parents. I know the whole North County cluster has been working on raising the awareness with the parents about how sick is too sick to come to school. Because I started in 91, right? And you could just write a note and it excused the kids. So there's that whole concept of it doesn't matter why you're not in school, it still counts against chronic absenteeism.
Maybe we should do that as one of the workshops. I said maybe we should do that as a workshop. How sick is too sick to come?
How sick is too sick?
So I'm going to suggest that I'm one of the guys that always talks about that relationship piece. And so I think the relationships at schools like Hilltop are spot on. You've got people there that are caring, people that they trust their students, they are trusted by their students. And parent involvement is a critical thing as well. So having said that, the other thing that's important is that you need leaders who know where to put the personnel that you have. And so I just think that's a critical piece. And I mean, I am proud of everyone at Hilltop, but I'm also proud of all of our kids across this county. And certainly, we know we have some work to do. We have some challenges. We're still suffering probably some learning losses from COVID. And I am concerned about some potential loss of resources from the state level that we're hearing. But having said that, I am also very grateful for Dr. Bedell, for every single one of you, and for his staff, for all of our teachers out there, because we have great staff, we have great students, we have people that care, we have people that know how to build relationships. I trust our teachers, and I might suggest that I'm not quite sure how much we do this, but I consider our teachers to be some of our experts, their greatest experts. And I consider them to be one of the greatest resources that we have as we take a look at this data. And so I just want to, I know we do it, but I want to make sure that our teachers hear it out there, that you are our experts. We need you to do a deep dive into this data. And the planning process, it's kind of like it was for a long time with the school improvement plan and so forth. And so, but having said that, I do want to thank all of you for a great presentation. And so I, at this point in time, what I'm going to say is if you have some more questions and you hit your lights, then I will call you that way. Okay? Or do you want to go another round? Okay, we'll do the light thing. So, Ms. Shawn.
Yes, thanks. So I want to go back to some of our data is lagged and shows up on this report card, creates a narrative for the community versus more recent data that we've received since then. And I'm talking about like Algebra 1 MCAP data, for example. I know that we like to wait for, and quite rightly, for the report card data every year. It's a big thing. We release it. We have a wonderful presentation like this. We all ask questions. It's great. But if we want to talk about moving the needle, especially since COVID times. Like we could do that now. Like we could do that like this MCAP Algebra 1 data, or that created the 2024 report card, versus data that we've since gotten, fairly recently from kids who took Algebra 1 MCAP last year, and say like, yes, this our report card and all its rooms show this, but we've already seen the improvement since the years of COVID. So it's not really a question. It's more of a statement.
But let me tell you, the whole purpose of tonight was about accountability, right? So that's
Of
what we
course.
shared with
Yes,
you.
quite
But
rightly.
to your point, you're 100% right. On the Maryland State Report Card website right now, instead of going to the accountability tab, right, which is labeled report card, you can jump over to MCAP and you can see the most recent test taker scores and their trend throughout time. And in fact, we don't love the lagging data, right? If you can't hear that in our tone. And so when we decided to do strategic plan scorecard reporting, we intentionally did not use the lagging data. We used test taker data for high schools because it was a better reflection of the work that we're doing now. So by all means, I believe if parents are asking questions and they're concerned, please go to the Maryland State Report Card website, click on the MCAP tab. You can see the trend. And just because we've been talking about Severna Park, you can see their trend is up over the last several years.
That's one of the
Let me
things I
give you
wanted-
one more piece that I think, so I'm hoping some of the folks who have expressed some concerns are listening. So we'll one up you on MCAP. Now, we made a decision this year based on our budget last year that we would start administering the pre-SAT. So if you really want to know where your kid is, pre-SAT actually returns the data in how long? How long does it take?
2-3 weeks.
3 weeks. You have real-time data for your 9th grader, your 10th grader, your 11th grader, that you as a parent can actually have some idea of where your kid is in relation to folks nationally on a norm reference assessment, rather than it being a criterion reference assessment, where I think a number of us, even behind this dais right here, have been questioning some of that. So we have more metrics that I think will give us a much more robust outlook that is available.
And I think all of that is great. I just think, well, it's not an or, it's an and. And we should be showing folks in posts and otherwise, these are some of the trends since COVID. This data is very lagging, some of it, high school level. Some of it's very, very lagging. That does not mean that Algebra 1 instruction is on fire in this county. It is not. It is not. It is not at all. I have an Algebra 1 student right now. I can tell you that she's working. And to tout one other thing, you talked about tutoring. Homework help is amazing and should never, ever go away. So, and I said that more than one time. So yeah, just to flip the script, right? If the script is, oh, we're doing so terribly, our schools are, this and that and the other, and it's all negative town. Well, I can tell you that at least the data I've been made aware of for one particular school, Severna Park High School, that, the trend from COVID to now, that slope is steep. See, I do know some now. Yeah.
Nice.
Thank you, Ms. Shahan. Or Dr. Tobin.
Thank you. I'll be super quick. I want to pick up on a couple of the comments about relationships. So I think if you take a sort of broad look at this, it's clear we do a lot of things really well at the elementary level. And again, particularly because there are a lot of community schools in District 6, the district I serve. I do think the incredible work that our community schools do at the elementary level to really reach out, know the students, connect with the families, and so on. I hope, as obviously transitions are one of the critical components of our strategic plan, that there's continuing work to ensure that handoff, not just in terms of are you ready to move in, say, from elementary to middle school, but the intentional work between the staffs If you're moving from Tyler Heights, say, to Annapolis Middle or whatever, those relationships remain intact, and are handed off to the next level, and then from middle to high school. Because obviously, for a whole host of reasons, elementary school, the children are there for many years relative to other, assuming a child stays, but they're smaller catchments, and the relationships are deeper. So I would just say that another component to continuing to do our work to, as Dr. Bedell has said, really continue to look at the middle school experience, and then lagging data notwithstanding, address the bigger gap between where we are in high school and the being in the top 5, because obviously all high schools across the state are dealing with lagging data. We're not alone in that. So, that I think is yet another piece that I know you're aware of, Dr. Bedell, and I hope we continue to focus on. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tobin. So, seeing no more lights, I want to thank you all so much and give you a round of applause. It's amazing as always. Dr. Bedell.
Just real quick, Mr. Dykstra, I didn't share this with you earlier on purpose. I wanted to wait to close this out, but this text message that I'm going to share is really a testament to the work you are doing. This just came today at 12:29. I've been continuing to follow the work of AACPS, and the design of the strategic plan scorecard is amazing. The authentic, transparent way you all are breaking down data is top tier. My eyes have never faltered away, and I'm learning as much as I possibly can with the work that you and your team is doing. That's a testament to you all. That's a testament to this presentation. I was very impressed from day one when I walked into the building and saw these houses built up and the data posted on the wall up there by the office. And just know that what you all are doing, there are people nationally following. They're taking time out of their schedule to go and look at our website, look at the stuff, and just know you're making a difference, not just here, but you're making a difference in the eyes of educators around the country. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr.
Yep.
Thank you, Dr. Bedell. So that does conclude our workshop this evening. Have a great evening. Good night.
All right. Thanks, everybody.